Anything good? They had a shooter yesterday in Jacksonville.
Wasn't it like some game?
A video, yeah, it was a video game tournament in Jacksonville, Florida. Shot the place up. Wounded 9 and killed 2. The last one that he killed was himself. A guy from Baltimore came down and now we're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Why would a gamer shoot up a gaming tournament? And he was there for the tournament. He must have lost. I don't know. Shut the place up. It hit himself first. Easy shot. Wounded 9 and killed 2. And we will get more information, it just happened yesterday, so. They figured out he was from Baltimore, I guess. Not bad. The law, wow, this is so confusing. This is Madonna. She's in her 50s now. She's kind of old. She was a beauty icon back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, 2000s, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, she's a singer. She's also an actress to some extent. She lived in a very expensive area of New York City. She's actually from New York City. She lives in France now. We'll talk about France in just a second. I think we'll talk about France. She was living in an apartment building, and she plays her music really, really loud. How many people play their music really, really loud? Just 1, 2 of you? 3. That's it. The rest of you turn it down when you drive down the road. When you listen to your Barry Manilow or Slipknot, whatever. I think he sings with Slipknot. Doesn't he? Barry Manilow? No, he doesn't. He's way too old. Anyway, so she's at her apartment and she plays her music really, really loud. I guess she's in the bathroom and she wants to make sure that she can hear the bass or something. I don't know. Anyway, so she was playing it so loud that one of her neighbors complained that sometimes it's so loud that he has to leave the apartment. Have you ever been in this situation, living in an apartment, a guy down below you is playing the music so loud you can't? You're the guy playing the music so loud. Okay. When I was in Germany, we lived in a house, and we lived on the top floor, and on the bottom floor, down in the basement, this bachelor lived down there. And he would play the same song at about 2 o'clock in the morning. He'd come back from the bar, the guest house, drunk as a skunk, and he would put on this one song, and he would play it really, really loud. And he was a big guy, great big guy, looked like a bear, had lots of hair all over the place, really kind of interesting fella. If I went down and asked him to turn down his radio, he would try to pick a fight with me. If my wife went down and asked him to turn it down, he'd turn it down. I know. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, he'd wake us up, and one of us would have to go down. Well, my wife didn't want to go down, usually, and I certainly didn't want to go down and get in a fight with this guy without hardly any clothes on. I mean, what am I going to do? Dress in all my, well, anyway. So a lot of times we just let it play. And it was the same song over and over again. We listened to that song for 1.5 years. Who Are You by The Who. I don't know if you've ever seen CSI. It's the song that they play at the beginning of the show. Oh my God, I hate that song. Why, of course I hate that song. Because this guy would play it. Eventually this guy got sent back to the States because he was drunk one night driving his car home, and this guy was on crutches, and he chased him and he tried to run over him. This guy on crutches who he didn't know. He hates people on crutches. Anyway, he ran into a ditch trying to hit this guy, and this guy jumped over the ditch, and he hit the ditch. And he was drunk, and of course, he got in trouble. Okay, so what happened? So should Madonna be able to play her music as loud as she wants? Or not? That's the question. Whose rights should prevail? The individual rights of Madonna or the common good? Because she's contaminating the entire area with noise, right? There are four basic choices that pervade the law in the United States and in many other countries. Each choice creates a dilemma and has psychological implications. The rights of the individual versus the common good. This is very obvious. Equality versus discretion. We're going to talk about that at the end of the chapter. To discover the truth or to resolve the conflict. So what's the truth and what's the, or do we just want to stop the two people from yelling at each other? Science versus the law as a source of decisions. And we're going to talk about all four of these basic choices that we have in the United States. This is what the Supreme Court has to make a decision on. But before it gets to the Supreme Court, it goes through the appellate courts. And the appellate courts decide what's going to happen. And then the Supreme Court either hears that case or it doesn't hear the case. Lots of questions coming up. Gay marriage was one of the questions. And the Supreme Court made decisions. The appellate court said that there's no reason why gay people can't marry one another. And of course, this had been law for, not law, nobody even questioned whether gay people should be able to get married or not. It was against the law. In some states, homosexuality was against the law. They referred to it as sodomy. It was against the law in select states. We're going to talk about this in just a second. So, what happened with Madonna? What did happen with Madonna? Which one won? The neighbor or Madonna? Did they make her turn down her radio or whatever she was playing? What do you think? Are individuals more important than the common good? In this case, who won? The neighbor. Makes sense, doesn't it? The neighbor won. The neighbor lost. Madonna won. And the neighbor moved. I know. It doesn't make sense. Smokers are now banned from lighting up in some public parks and beaches and along shorelines and trails around the United States, in forests, in national forests. You can't light up a cigarette if it's a common trail that other people use. So where can you smoke? Where can you smoke?
By a smoking pole.
Okay. So there are designated areas where you can smoke now.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you smoke in your own house?
If you're not moving under HUD.
Oh, is that right? HUD bill
That's a new law that was passed by HUD or NHA and all other public housings that they're banning smoking from all public housing.
Does that make sense to you?
No, because it's kind of just like imprisoning people even more. You know, there's already enough laws and guidelines restricting people with how they're living.
What is their rationale for not letting people smoke in HUD housing?
Garbage,
Creates garbage?
apparently.
Okay.
Apparently that it's a lot worse than the mattresses laying outside, couches.
So there is a rationale to it? It
There
has
is
to
a
do.
rationale to it, yeah, from the management, it's due to littering.
If I smoke in my house, okay. Of course, I'm taking in the smoke. But what happens?
The
I'm
secondhand smoke.
yeah. So there's secondhand smoke.
Mhm.
There's also residue from the secondhand smoke. That's thirdhand smoke. So it's all over the place. We were working. We were trying to renovate this guy's house. He had gotten old. He had emphysema. I know, and he smoked. He smoked like a chimney all of his life. So we went into his house and tried to fix his house. And one of the things that we tried to do was get the smell out of the walls. It did not come out of the walls. There's nothing we could do. We painted it. It came through. Sometimes, when we painted it with white paint, it actually came through as yellow. So there were yellow spots all over the walls. The tars and nickel came through the paint. So what do you do with that? Well, there's a thing called kills. Have you ever kills? That's a really thick, yeah, it's a primer. It's a primer. So the kills kind of work a little bit, not too well, but the smell is, we couldn't get rid of it. So potentially that, of course, that's your basic problem, is the fact that you're contaminating the house forever. I do have another story. It's about my great niece. My great niece was a meth supplier. She cooked meth in her house, or she let people come into her house to cook meth. Oh, I know. Can you ever get that stuff out of the walls? Never. So she was arrested. They declared that house had to be destroyed because it was contaminated with all the chemicals. So guess who had to pay for it? Not me, of course. It was my brother had to pay for it because it was his house. So he had to pay to have the house destroyed. It cost him $8,000 to get the house destroyed. My poor brother. I know. We feel sorry for my brother. Anyway, okay. So we've got smoking. We can't smoke in public places. Almost all over the United States. Some cities, they have banned it from, you can't go outside to smoke, you can't stay inside to smoke, so where do you smoke? You can smoke in your car, you can smoke usually in your house, unless it's in public housing. Should cities be able to limit smoking in public areas? Does this make sense? So you guys are all, this is the Supreme Court, so does this make sense to you? That cities can tell you cannot smoke in public places. Does that make sense to you? There's 2 places you can smoke now. One of them is in Indian casinos, okay, because the federal laws don't apply in Indian casinos. But if you go to a casino in Atlantic City or Las Vegas, you can't smoke. But if you go to, I don't know if they let you, Fire Rock or whatever. Can you smoke there? I don't know. I've never. You can? Yeah. It's like the only place you can smoke. So you get these old ladies that have been smoking for a while. They've been smoking since they went through menopause. And so they go to the casino just so they can smoke and play it, as odd as it seems. Should smokers' rights or non-smokers' rights prevail? For the longest time, when they tried to pass laws to ban smokers from being in certain areas, they couldn't get the laws passed. Because the smokers' rights, the individual rights were more important than the non-smokers' rights. When I was in the service, I can remember when they changed the policy. We had a lady on base that was very sensitive to tobacco smoke. And everybody smoked in the, almost all the time. Not everybody, of course I didn't smoke. But there were a lot of people that smoked a lot. They chain smoked while they were at work. And of course cigarettes, they gave them away. They literally did give them away with the K rations. This is during Vietnam. I don't think they give them away with MREs anymore, but we got cigarettes. We got a package of 5 cigarettes. And I used to trade mine for gum or something, whatever. Anyway, so that was in the old days. And of course the question was who's more important. At that time, smokers' rights were more important than non-smokers' rights. But she was very sensitive and she developed lung cancer from the secondhand smoke. She was that sensitive to tobacco. And she sued the federal government and she won. This is on our base. And she won the case and they made them stop smoking at work. You couldn't smoke at work anymore. Military people. This is back in the 1980s. And of course all that changed. 2012, 6 states and the District of Columbia, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, Iowa, and Connecticut legalized gay marriages. As odd as that may seem, we've already covered all this, didn't we? I don't remember. Anyway. It was on the docket for Washington and Maryland. They had referendums on their ballots to legalize same-sex marriages. And then the federal government came out and decided that as far as the government was concerned, as far as federal employees were concerned, they could be, gay people could be married as far as the federal government was concerned. And it was really difficult for the states to say no. There were some states that decided, that wrote laws that stated that marriage was only between a man and a woman. There were a number of states that said that. But when the federal law, when they passed the federal law, saying that they would pay benefits to gay marriages, it changed everything. The states, then they decided that the conservative states, where they were the ones that decided who can marry who, that was unconstitutional. And now gay marriage is illegal all over the United States. And that's the way it worked. Like I said, in some states, homosexuality was considered illegal. It was illegal in that state. So is it the individual states that have the right to decide what should happen in their state? Or should it be the federal government? We had segregated schools in the United States until the federal government decided it was unconstitutional. That separate but equal was not equal. And that's the way some states argued it. The first college that I taught at was a historically black college. And the reason that college was set up in the state of Oklahoma was because there was a law in that state that whites and blacks could not be educated together. So they had black colleges, and they had one black college, and they had all these white colleges all over the state. And that's where I taught. Back in 1991, I started teaching at Langston University in Langston, Oklahoma. I was the only white faculty member, which was kind of interesting. I was the only white faculty member at the institution. That was different. But not all of my students were black. That was the interesting thing. They started integrating. At that point, they had already passed the laws to integrate. And of course, not all of my students were black. Some of them were white. And some of them were native. Older people were more against same-sex marriage than young people were, as you can imagine. The individuals that had grown up with this idea felt that it was traditional. This is the way it's always been, so why change things? So older people tended to be more conservative than young people. And of course, the question was, who's going to win? Which idea is going to prevail? And of course, this is a question that we have to answer every time we have an election. Who are we going to back? Are we going to back the conservative that is less progressive, or are we going to back the liberals who are more progressive? That's the idea. And of course, you just lost your senator. John McCain died on Saturday at the age of 81, so you're going to have to elect a new senator in the next election, I'm guessing. That's the way it's going to work. I think the governor's going to appoint a senator, probably, but then you guys will get to elect a new senator or you have to elect a new senator anyway, with Flake. Flake is retiring. So you get to elect 2 new senators come November. And you'll have to decide whether you will back the progressive or you will back the person that's more conservative. Should be interesting to see how that works. This is a constant argument that's taking place in the United States. Should we be more conservative or should we be more liberal? This is the argument that's taking place with the Supreme Court. Justice Kennedy stepped down in July, I think it was July, or was it the end of June? 30th of June, he retired. So now they're trying to appoint a new Justice of the Supreme Court. Brett Kavanaugh is the individual that President Trump has nominated. And the question is, do we want another conservative member of the Supreme Court? Do we get to decide who is appointed to the Supreme Court? You guys get to decide. Who gets to decide? The people?
What was the question again?
Do we get to vote?
Yeah.
Are we going to vote for Supreme Court justice? It's not the way it works. The president appoints the candidate, and then the Senate decides whether he's acceptable or not. This has been going on forever until President Obama. And Justice Scalia died a year before the election. And instead of allowing Obama to appoint somebody to the Supreme Court, they wouldn't allow the candidate to come before the Senate. So for a whole year, we only had 8 members of the Supreme Court. And then, of course, President Trump was elected president, and he appointed somebody, and that person was the Senate passed it, and he is now in the Supreme Court. I'm trying to think what his name is. Starts with a G. I can't remember. Anyway, okay, that's the way it works. Some cities have banned what they refer to as sagging pants. This is really kind of an odd argument because I used to see this on Facebook when I read Facebook. I don't know if people are still complaining about guys showing off their underwear. I don't want to see that guy's underwear. I don't want to see that guy's butt. Anyway, so some cities are passing ordinances where if you show all your underwear, if your pants sag down to your thighs, I guess, that they can arrest you for disorderly conduct, as interesting as that is. I don't see that around here. This is really not an issue here that I've seen. Do you see sagging pants anyplace on the reservation? You do. Well, Pinyon has sagging pants. All the cool guys wear their pants way down low. Oh, so you can see the top of their underwear. Okay. Pretty much. Is that good or is that bad? Uh-oh. What did I do? Okay. What do you think? Sagging pants. Let's vote. Should there be an ordinance that you have to pull your pants up a certain... Okay. I got a yes. No? Yes. Okay. You can see the damn underwear. They all wear boxers. Really colorful boxer shorts. Isn't that the right word? Yes, okay, so we're 2 and 2. No, we're 3 and 1. Sagging pants, what do you think? Come on. This is an issue, this is really important. You're walking down the street and all of a sudden you can see this guy's butt crack. No, you don't want to do that? You don't want to see that guy's butt crack? So you're saying, yes, there should be an ordinance to make that kid pull his pants up. They're making pants that sag naturally. I don't know. There should be, okay. Okay. Sure, just sure. Yeah, I want to see it.
No.
No. So I got 2 no's and everybody else is a yes.
I gotta wear a bra, he's gotta pull up his pants.
He's got to pull up his pants. Yes. 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 Okay, let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a quick story. I went to Albuquerque to the base this Saturday, and I'm buying groceries at the commissary, and of course I'm running into people and all kinds of stuff. There's a guy in front of me, the old guy. The guy must have been in his 70s or 80s, and when he put his clothes on this morning, he tucked his shirt into his underwear. Okay, so. As he's walking along, this old fart, walking along, his pants right down and his shirt stayed where it was. Okay, so here I can see the top of his underwear, and I'm thinking, oh man, I don't know if they have a law in New Mexico or not about sagging pants. This is in Albuquerque. I don't know, but I'm turning the guy in. Except no. Well, I can see about that much of his underwear. And he's got on tidy whities. I know what kind of underwear he's got on. They're Hanes. I could see the tag right there. He had his underwear on backwards or inside out. Of course, he's an old man. He's got wearing his tidy whities. But I can see the top of his underwear. And I was appalled. Oh, I really can't do that. I was appalled. So the question is it a question of freedom of expression? Does a community have the right to set their code of decency more conservatively than society in general? Do we tell people what to wear? We don't? Can you wear anything that you want? Sure. When you go to the beach, Do you have to wear jeans at the beach? No, you can wear just about like anything. I mean, some of these, you guys have never been to Florida. If you've ever been to Florida, they don't wear a whole lot of clothes down there. It's really kind of interesting. And of course, arguing about where your pants are when you're running around on the beach and all these people are wearing hardly anything on the top and even less on the bottom. You're thinking, who cares if I can see this kid's underwear? He's got a lot more pants on than that old man wearing Speedos over on the beach. Oh my God. Anyway, so Florida doesn't have the same rules that we have here. This is a really serious one. 2006, a Baptist church in Topeka, Kansas, the Westboro Baptist Church, began protesting the U.S. Liberal policy of allowing homosexuality to go unpunished by protesting at soldiers' funerals that the soldiers died as punishment for U.S. gay policies. This was a church. These guys would go all over the place. I mean, all over the place. They came up to Montana, and everybody got real upset because they had these signs and saying that you died because God is punishing you for your homosexual policies. That's what the sign said, and the people in Montana were upset. You can imagine if you go to a funeral and all of a sudden these guys show up and say, I'm glad that person's dead. I know that they were only a 19-year-old soldier, but I'm glad they're dead because they died because God was punishing them. That's what they said. I know there were a lot of really, really upset people. Now the question was, how would the Supreme Court read this? Could they ban these individuals from going around the country and torturing these people? I mean, you can imagine somebody coming up to you at a funeral and saying, I'm glad that your son is dead. You can imagine how that must hurt. But it was going on every weekend. These guys were going someplace. And they picked one up in Montana. It looked like they were going to have, somebody was going to die. One of these individuals was going to die. Because there were some really pissed off people. The police had to guard these individuals in order to keep them safe because there were this was on the reservation. It was the Fort Belknap reservation. The motorcycle guys came and were really upset, and they were going to attack these guys. So the police had to come out to protect the Westboro Baptist Church contingency. So who's right and who's wrong? Do they have a right to say what they want? And the answer is yes. The Supreme Court decided as far for the Westboro Baptist Church, they decided it was free speech, and they couldn't limit free speech. As repugnant as what they did, what they did. I'm living in Iowa now. The guy down the street goes to every military funeral to make sure these guys don't show up. And if they do show up, then he sets up right in front of them so that they can't see the signs. He's got a motorcycle gang. And motorcycle group, let's call it a group. He's like 70 years old. That's a little fart. And he sets up in front of these guys so that they can't see the signs. And they get all around them. And they're protecting these people as much as the police would be protecting them. But they're not allowing their message to be heard, as interesting as that is. The United States is one of the most individualistic countries on earth. France is actually the most individualistic country around. People can deviate from the norm. Freedom and personal autonomy are two of our most deeply desired values. People need to feel secure. Society has a vested interest in discouraging risks that might injure the individual or others as it creates a burden on society. And of course, we have used this need for security, for people to feel secure, to control select situations. What kind of a situation am I talking about? For the longest time, homosexuality was against the law. And they passed laws in select states that said you could not be gay in their community. And that was a security issue. That's what they used it as. They wanted to keep this idea away from their children, and that's what they used. Pornography in the United States was banned for an extended length of time. The Comstock laws were written in the 1880s, and the Comstock laws would not allow pornography to be mailed to anybody. And this is one of the reasons why in the old days, if you ordered pornography, it came in a brown paper wrapper. They weren't advertising the fact that this is a girly magazine or whatever, as odd as that may seem. They also banned information about birth control. Birth control was against the law in a lot of places in the United States until the 1960s. As odd as that may seem. I mean, now they're handing out condoms at grade schools. Not really. They're handing out condoms in schools. But in the old days, you couldn't even talk about birth control. If you didn't want to impregnate somebody, you had no way of not doing it. I guess that makes sense. Condoms, you had to get a prescription to get a condom. They didn't sell them out in public, and this is known as the Comstock laws. The idea was that they were trying to protect society. And this wasn't changed until the 1960s. Well, some states ignored these laws. And of course, you can ignore a law. A state can ignore a law. That's what Arizona did when the Supreme Court told them to stop stopping people to find out if they have a green card. Arizona didn't do it. And then that's when Sheriff Arpaio was indicted for doing whatever he did, stopping people. Telling his deputies that they had to stop people. So states can ignore select laws. That's what happened with prohibition. Prohibition was a national law. But some states just ignored it, or they only supported part of it. Consider U.S. Supreme Court decisions since the 1960s with respect to the rights of criminal suspects and defendants versus the rights of crime victims and the power of the police. Before the 1960s, you could do just about anything you wanted to somebody that you thought was a criminal. You could grill them. You could give them the third degree. You could beat them if you could get. Well, you could beat them as long as you didn't kill them. You could do just about anything to get a confession from people, and they did. And then they realized you didn't have to tell them anything. They would come in and you could scare the bejesus out of them and get them to confess, or get them to confess to something that they didn't actually do. Because you scared them. You would threaten them with torture. You could do that. You could tell them anything that you wanted. And then in the 1960s, they realized, wait a minute, we're convicting a lot of people that aren't actually guilty. So maybe we need to create rights for the criminals, or rights for somebody that is suspected of being a criminal. Maybe we shouldn't assume that they're a criminal until they actually go to court. That's an idea. Before, they just threw you in jail. And then you went to court, and you were convicted, and then you went to jail. That's the way it worked. But you were a criminal as soon as you got arrested. That's the way it worked. And then in the 1960s, they decided, well, maybe that's not right, because we seem to be arresting a lot of people that aren't actually guilty. This isn't good. Well, this was especially bad in the South. In the South, if somebody committed a crime, they went out and found the first black person that they could, and they accused them of that crime. And since they could do all these horrible things to people, they usually, before they got themselves beaten to death, they usually confessed for the crime, despite the fact that it wasn't them that did it. It wasn't even a black guy that did it. It was a white guy that did it. But they would automatically go and arrest somebody that was black. So they decided that they needed to change the laws. So back in the early 1960s, they started supporting the criminals. So over the next 30 years, they were writing laws to keep the police from picking on the criminals. In the 1960s, the Supreme Court established a number of principles that provided or expanded explicit rights for those suspected of breaking the law, and these are known as the Miranda rights. These are your Miranda rights. And of course, before the 1960s, there were no Miranda laws. So if they arrested you, you had no clue what your rights were. As a matter of fact, it all depended on where you were as to what rights you had. You have the right to an attorney. You have the right not to say anything. Before, they forced you to talk. Now they couldn't do that. As interesting as all that is. Okay. Now you have the right to remain silent. Before you didn't. Many of these rights were trimmed later when the courts ruled in favor of the police, and this didn't change until the 1990s. So the laws were dipping toward the suspect, the criminal, the potential criminal. They were not guilty just because you thought they were. They had the right to remain silent. They had the right to a lawyer, and of course, but in the 1990s, they decided that we had gone too far in a select direction. So the Supreme Court ruled that the police can stop a motorist whom they believe has violated traffic laws, even if their ulterior motive is to investigate the possibility of illegal drug dealing. This had to do with drugs. There were drugs being moved all over the United States. There still are. There probably are individuals moving drugs on 40. I'm guessing on 40 is a real conduit for the drugs coming up from the Mexican border. Just a guess. So they decided you could stop somebody for speeding, and then you could look for drugs. If it looks like somebody might potentially be a drug courier of one kind or another, a mule, as it were. Okay, they decided you could go ahead and stop that guy for speeding. There are two models of criminal justice. The conflict between the rights of individuals and the rights of society. So this isn't an absolute. The Supreme Court is constantly changing the rules. And it happened in the 1960s. It started tilting toward the suspect. It was a more liberal court. It was a more liberal court into the 1990s. In the 1990s, who was president in 1990? George H.W. Bush. Reagan had been president for 8 years, and then Bush. So we had 12 years of a relatively conservative presidency. All that time we were losing and gaining new Supreme Court justices. All of a sudden, Rehnquist became the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It tilted to the right. And all of a sudden, they changed the laws again. So we had a conservative court. And everything was different. Does all this make sense? So laws are not absolute. We can change, we can change them. We can change the laws if we need to. And that's what the Supreme Court has done. Now the interesting thing is, we have a conservative president, and he's trying to appoint a judge to the Supreme Court. And if that happens, what's going to happen next? Potentially. The laws are going to become more conservative. They're going to start interpreting the laws more conservatively. This should be interesting. I don't know how you feel about abortion, but they're afraid that the liberals are afraid that the abortion rights are going to go away, that birth control rights are going to go away. Because with a conservative court, you never know what's going to happen next. Does that make sense? With a liberal court, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen unless there's a balance on the court. And of course, if Kavanaugh gets nominated to the Supreme Court, all of a sudden the balance is going to tip to a more conservative court. Should be fascinating to watch. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens next. Okay, so there's two models of the criminal justice system. The conflict between the rights of individuals and the rights of society is related to a distinction between the due process model and the crime control model within the criminal justice system. So who is more important, the individual or society? That's the question. Who is more important? Conservative courts tend to support society over the individual. Liberal courts tend to support the individual over society. It all depends. really kind of interesting. One of the reasons that the whole deal about Ruth Bader Ginsburg has come up recently is because she's a liberal member of the court. And she's 81 years old, I think. I think she's that old. And they thought that she was going to be the next one to retire. But she's a liberal member of the court. She says she's not going to retire until she can be replaced by a liberal justice. In other words, they have to elect a liberal president. So she's going to hang on for a while, it looks like. I hope. Well, you never know. You just never know. You never know who's going to die. Scalia died one night of a heart attack, and everybody just went crazy because he was a really, really conservative voice in the Supreme Court. Okay, so there's two models that we're going to look at, the due process model and the crime control model. And this has to do with politics, and once again, has to do with politics. The due process model has been favored since the 1960s. The due process model places the primary values on the protection of citizens, including criminal suspects, from possible abuses by the police and the law enforcement system generally. Do the police abuse their rights? Do they abuse their power? I got one nod of the head, yes. Do they? Aren't they all really good people, and
Not all.
they hire them, and they make sure that they're mentally stable? Okay, no? Is that not always? Are there some bad guys out there? Really? Are there bad guys on the reservation? Some of the tribal cops are not good people? They arrest you, they'll let you go if you have sex with them. Does that ever happen? Does that happen here? Because it was happening up north. Oh, it's terrible. Rocky Boy Reservation was horrible. Yeah, all the cops are corrupt. So what did they do? They closed down their criminal justice system, and the BIA moved in. They moved the BIA cops in, which was almost as bad. Because, I mean, all the Rocky Boy cops were Chippewa Cree, and then when they moved the BIA guys in, some of them were from down here. They had Chippewas from Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan. It was bad. It was really bad because they hated the guys that weren't from their own reservation. Anyway, but I mean, what are they going to do? The police chief was corrupt. He was taking kickbacks. What are they going to do? And this can happen just like anywhere, not just on reservations, of course. It can also happen in communities. Sheriff Arpaio decided he was going to create his own laws and start checking everybody for their immigration status. The due process model assumes the innocence of suspects and requires that they be treated fairly by the criminal justice system. So if you're arrested and indicted, it doesn't mean you're guilty, of course. In the old days, it did. If you were arrested and you're indicted by a grand jury, it meant that you were guilty. That's the way it worked. Thus, the due process model emphasizes the rights of the individuals over the temptation by society to assume suspects are guilty even before the trial. And if you've ever watched any of the old cowboy movies, a lot of times the vigilantes will come out and they will hang somebody just after they were arrested because they knew that they were guilty, which may or may not have been true. Crime control model was favored in the 1990s. So from the 1960s until the 1990s, we had the due process model, and then in the 1990s, things skewed in the other direction. The crime control model seeks the apprehension and punishment of lawbreakers. The goal is to ensure that criminal activity is being contained or reduced. What happened in the 1990s that caused this to happen? Besides having a conservative president and a conservative Supreme Court. What else happened? What was going on in the 1990s that we needed to protect society? 1990s. You guys are all too young to even know anything about this. Any ideas what was going on in the 1990s? Three-strike laws was passed by Reagan in California in the 1980s.
Domestic violence?
Yeah, that's California. Domestic violence increased? Is that what was going on?
Major crime,
What kind of major crimes? about the same. Drugs. Drugs got worse, real bad. We had cocaine was coming across the border in semis. It was horrible. The cartels were starting to control things. People were starting to get shot up down on the border because the drugs were more important. The money was more important than the people were. So we started having a really serious problem. One of Ronald Reagan's friends, his yacht was Shanghai, and they were killed and thrown overboard. And they used that yacht to smuggle drugs, and he got pissed. So he decided he was going to change things, and he was going to declare war on drugs. We had a war on drugs before, but it wasn't these kind of drugs, and it wasn't the drug cartels of Colombia. So in the 1990s, we had all these drugs coming across. We had people, they were converting submarines, and they were shipping drugs into the United States in submarines. They were flying cargo planes full of drugs to the United States in the 1990s. So it was drugs. It changed everything. It changed the crime control model. Skewed in that direction. It was all these drugs. And one of the things that happened, he was able to get the military to start fighting the drug war. So the three branches of service that were tapped to control the drugs coming into the United States were the United States Coast Guard, of course, who had been fighting drugs all along. But it was also the United States Navy who could control the open seas, and it was also the Air Force. So we made the Air Force, the Navy, and the Coast Guard into DEA agents, into drug agents. And the Air Force started focusing, before we were focusing on the Russians. The wall went down in 1989. Now all of a sudden we didn't have to worry about nuclear war. So all of a sudden the Air Force could start focusing on drugs. And so we started making the flights that we were flying over the Arctic to control the air traffic in that area. We started flying over South America and Central America to control air traffic. I know, it's weird. And so when we sent people in to destroy these places where they were cooking cocaine and cooking crystal meth, it was Air Force personnel. And we armed them with all kinds of interesting weapons, and they went in and they burned these places down. And it changed everything. It just changed the way they were doing things. We didn't really stop all the drugs from coming in. But it was the drugs. It was drugs in the 1990s. It was coming in masses. The crime control model seeks the apprehension and punishment of lawbreakers. The goal is to ensure that criminal activity is being contained and reduced. The 3 strikes life term came into being in California. This is especially true of drugs. If you have a drug conviction in your past, then the 3-strike law is one that takes effect. Maximum penalties for select crimes. And most of these crimes had to do with drugs. Now we're getting a little confusing here, aren't we? Because when we talk about drugs, does that include marijuana? Well, it did in the United States for an extended length of time until Colorado and Washington passed the legalized marijuana. So now we've got a lot of confusion going on. The Obama administration decided that they were not going to prosecute people for drug possession. But for pushing drugs, of course, they would. They would still prosecute those laws. The current administration has kind of flip-flopped, and we're not exactly sure where they are as far as that is concerned. But in the old days, if you got caught with drugs and you were dealing those drugs, you could get thrown in jail for an extended length of time, 10, 15 years. 1 out of every 32 Americans is either incarcerated or on parole or on probation. I was teaching down in Mississippi, and I had a student who was an African American female, and she'd been out of high school for about 5 years. And she said, you know what, I'm having a lot of trouble finding a boyfriend. She was a relatively attractive individual. She said, all of the people that I graduated from high school with are either dead, they're in jail, or they're on parole. I don't know anybody that's not a criminal. Of course, this is in Mississippi. She was African American. Most of the people she was talking about were African Americans. They are normally the ones that they pick up for these kinds of crimes, whether they commit them or not. And of course, arresting people and convicting them is not that difficult. In Mississippi at the time, if you are a juror and you're white, then you're more likely to be on a jury if you're white. If you're black, then you're probably not going to ever be on a jury. You don't have to worry about it. But at that time, of course, this is in the early 1990s. The principle of equality means that all people who commit the same crime should receive the same consequences. Does that make sense? So I speed, I should get the same ticket that Stephanie gets when she speeds, even though Stephanie doesn't drive that fast. But what really does happen? Stephanie speeds, does she get a ticket? I get one every damn time I get caught. So what's going on? Am I being picked on? Is that equality? Why doesn't she get the ticket? When I was down in Mississippi, this cute little blonde girl was in my class, and she said, well, nobody gets tickets in Mississippi. I'm thinking, lady, I just got a ticket. I just got a ticket from a sheriff. It wasn't even a state cop, it was a sheriff. And she said, oh no, every time I get stopped, they just give me a warning and let me go. Yeah, right, yeah, they probably do just give her a warning and let her go, but I never got a warning. They never warned me once. They just socked it to me. For one thing, I had the wrong accent. I didn't have a sweet little voice like she did. And I probably didn't bat my eyes at the cop either. I probably didn't. I know I didn't bat my eyes at the cop. But I got a ticket, she didn't, which I didn't think was fair at all. Blind adherence to equality can lead to unfairness in situations in which the particular characteristics of the offender, the victim, or the offense matter. If I beat somebody up, yeah, like that's going to happen. All right, if somebody else beats somebody up, some guy just randomly beats somebody up, he should be arrested and put in jail for the violence. But what if it's his spouse that he beats up? Should he still be thrown in jail? What if it's the female that beats up the guy because he's been wailing on her for the last 15 years? Should she get arrested? She beat the guy up, kick the holy hell out of him. It's not why I got stabbed by my wife. It didn't have anything to do with it. I got stabbed by my wife because I fell asleep while she was arguing with me, okay? That's the reason she stabbed me, because I wasn't listening, I guess. I'm a real good listener, but not when I'm asleep. I don't listen nearly as well. She got pissed. She already stabbed me twice that day, so that was the third time she stabbed me.
Where did she stab you at?
She stabbed me in the leg. Stabbed me in the leg, she stabbed me in the arm, and then she stabbed me in the chest. The first two times she stabbed me, I moved. But the third time she stabbed me, I was asleep. I couldn't move. And she got me right over the
You didn't
heart.
leave after the first stab?
No, I had 2 kids. I wasn't going to leave her, that crazy lady there with my 2 kids. That would be crazy. That would be crazy. And the second time, my daughter got in front of me so my wife would stop. Swinging the blade. It was a steak knife, okay? It's not like it's a swing blade that she's swinging. It doesn't have anything to do. She was pissed at me because I fell asleep. Yeah. You're not supposed to fall asleep while you're arguing. You've never done that?
I don't remember.
Okay, yeah, you asleep. Okay, thus discretion must be taken into account. So if a lady has been beat on by some guy and she decides to retaliate and finally knocks the tar out of him, should she be arrested? should she be arrested? In some states, they have a really hard time with this. In some states, if somebody is assaulted, whether it's the husband or the wife, they arrest both of them. They arrest both parties. That's the way it works. Because they can't, it's not up to the police to decide who is right and who is wrong. That's a judge's decision. So they arrest both parties. In some states, they just separate the two people. They take one of them out of the house. If there are children involved, they take the male out of the house, usually take the male out of the house. And they have him stay away. And they will put a restraining order on him. So if he comes back to the house, all she has to do is call the police. And they go and arrest him the second time because they told him to stay away from the house. And he didn't do it. All people should be treated equally, and no one should receive special treatment by the courts simply because he or she is rich, influential, or whatever. And of course, this is what we're worried about with what's going on with the Manafort case, with the Cohen case. They have just given immunity to the individual that is the CFO of the Trump Organization. They've just given him immunity, so he's going to be able to testify. Last week they gave immunity to the guy that is the editor of the National Enquirer, because he seems to be getting information about Donald Trump and squelching it. He won't allow it to escape, and that's David Pecker. Anyway, so is he getting something that other people don't get? Is this the way that the law works? Do we give immunity to one guy so that he'll turn on the other guy? Is that the way it works? If there's more than one guy, usually that's what we do. I told you about my cousin that murdered the guy. Well, the other guy dropped the dime on him, and so he was the one that went to prison because the other guy is the one that murdered him, according to my cousin. Anyway, the other guy theoretically was the one that murdered him. It was the other guy's idea to throw him in the trunk and to sink the car, but of course he dropped the dime on my cousin, and that's why he went to prison for murder. And of course he was stupid. He came back to Indiana for that girl, and she was dating somebody else. Oh, what an idiot! So it wasn't even his girlfriend. Okay, he came back to see somebody just because he liked her, I guess. However, there have been incidents that suggest unequal treatment of citizens by the legal system, and this is known as profiling. So if you're driving down the road and they can see in your car and they see that you have darker skin than I do, then the probability is that they will stop you for one reason or another. I told you when I was in Montana, my car looked like it was a native car, so they used to stop me from time to time for really strange reasons. And then when they found out I was an old white guy, they went, oh, okay, and then they let me go. They would give me a warning. But I had a friend that would drive 100 miles an hour down the road. Of course, you can do that in Montana. There's hardly ever any cops. But he would do that. He'd drive 100 miles an hour. It's crazy. I never drove 100 miles an hour. There's no reason to do it. He used to blow the engines out of his car. But this is known as profiling, where you take an individual, and that may be what's happening with all these, with the shootings of black males. We're not hearing about black females being shot. So it isn't the fact that they're of their race, it's the fact of their race and their gender. Why are black males so dangerous? Why are they so much more dangerous than white males? Or Hispanic males? Or Native males? What is so dangerous about black people? Come on, you watch Cops, you know what's going on. Who are the bad guys? We have to be able to identify the bad guys. This is a problem in Vietnam. Everybody looked the same. All Vietnamese are not very tall, kind of skinny. So the enemy didn't have a special uniform on, unless they were North Vietnamese, then they had uniforms on. But we couldn't tell the difference. We couldn't tell the good guys from the bad guys. And that may have been a problem in Jacksonville this weekend. How do you tell a good guy from a bad guy? personally, I think that that's the reason I was so scared in Tucumcari when the guy in front of me had 2 guns on his hip. I didn't know if he was a good guy or a bad guy. So being the paranoid person that I am, I assumed that he was bad. Why should I assume that he's good just because he's walking around with a gun? Come on, let's get real. He might be a shooter. He might have come into Blake's because, I don't know, he hated their hamburgers or something. He had chicken anyway. Between 2004 and 2009, police officers in New York City stopped approximately 3 million people. 52% of the people stopped were African American. 30% of the people stopped were Hispanic. Really? Half the people in New York City are black? Really? 30% of the people in New York City are Hispanic? Really? They're all Puerto Ricans? I saw the West Side Story. Most of them were young and poor. So most of the people in New York City are black, Hispanic, young and poor. Really? Why did they stop them? This is something that Rudy Giuliani did. He's the one that started this stuff. And he claimed that he was trying to control crime. Who commits crimes in New York City? Well, obviously, black people do, Hispanic people do, and they're all young and poor. Poor people are the only ones that commit crimes in New York City. Well, that's not right. We know that Cohen just pled guilty to 8 counts of tax evasion, and he's a rich white guy. Well, anyways, so this is known as racial profiling. And they said that they were trying to control crime. That's what Donald Trump wanted Rahm Emanuel to do in Chicago. Chicago had, 44 shootings in one weekend, a couple of weeks ago? He wants them to do the same thing. He wants them to profile. He wants them to stop people on the street. Find out if they have drugs in their car. Find out if they have guns. Can you have guns in Chicago? Oh, you can't. There's a law against having guns in Chicago. So you can stop them and frisk them and find out if they have guns. But only certain people. They're not going to stop me in Chicago. I'm too old for one thing, and I'm too white for another thing, so they're not going to stop me in Chicago. But what they want them to do is to stop the people that they think are the ones that are most likely to commit a crime. However, when I go to the airport, guess who gets frisked for explosives? I've been checked like 5 times. Do I look like a bomber? Do I fit the profile? Evidently. No, it's kind of random with TSA. They have to do the white people so that they can stop the people that look, from the Middle East. So they always pick on me because I show my military ID, so they know I'm military. They know I won't get pissed off. Yeah, they check the palms of my hands for explosive residue.
That racial profiling. Over the weekend I was in Farmington, shopping at the East Walmart, and standing there
Which
in line.
Walmart was it? Was it the Indian Walmart or the white Walmart? Was it the white Walmart?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was standing in a customer service line and noticed this Caucasian lady with her daughter, a teenage daughter. They're walking by and she says, "Get your receipt. That lady is going to ask us for a receipt at the door." So I looked down there and it was another lady, which was kind of different.
Because she was white. It was a Navajo lady who's going to stop the white people. Good. That's racial profiling. Okay. I'm glad that. Are you sure it was a Navajo lady? Wasn't it?
Yeah, it's really
Okay.
good.
Interesting. Turnabout is fair play. Sometimes it doesn't happen very often. Relevant to the issue of equality under the law, the U.S. Supreme Court has occasionally applied principle of proportionality. The punishment should be consistently related to the magnitude of the offense. So if somebody gets arrested for murder, what happens next? Well, murder is fairly serious, so it should be proportional. Somebody who murders somebody should go to jail for a longer period of time than somebody that steals a package of gum. Or whatever. Since psychosocial immaturity renders juveniles less culpable and more likely to be rehabilitated than adult offenders, the U.S. Supreme Court has overturned harsh sentences for juvenile offenders in the quest of equality. There are certain states that don't follow these laws. There are certain states that, there are some states where you cannot be tried as a juvenile for a capital crime or for a felony. Okay, some states. And in other states, if you, especially if it's a capital crime, if you murdered somebody, they will try you as an adult. And that is the way it works in the state of Indiana. The state of Indiana, if you murder somebody and you're only 16 years old, then they can try you as an adult. And they can do anything, they can throw the book at you if they like. In the state of Indiana, and that's what happened to my cousin. He was tried in the state of Indiana. Ohio wouldn't even extradite him. They wouldn't even send him over to Indiana. And it's because Indiana has far stricter juvenile offense laws than Ohio does. So they wouldn't even arrest him and send him over there. Those who commit murder before 18 cannot be given the death penalty. This is according to Roper versus Simmons in 2005. Nor automatically sentenced to life without parole. This is what happened with Miller versus Alabama in 2012. As you can see, these are relatively recent cases. So before that, before 2005, if you killed somebody when you were 16 years old, they could give you the death penalty. Now this is really kind of interesting as far as the school shooters are concerned. Because we've got the kid down at Parkland. How many kids did he kill? 17? He killed 17 people, and he is under arrest. And we'll see what happens with the kid. But of course, according to the Roper versus Simmons, he can't be put in jail for, he can't be given the death penalty. I think he's 18 anyway. I think he's 18. And he can't be given life without parole because of Miller versus Alabama. This is actually Miller. This is what he looked like when he was 14 years old. This is the guy that he murdered. Theoretically, according to Miller, this guy was molesting him and had been molesting him for years. So he went over to his house one night and blew his brains out, well, blew his head off with a shotgun. 12 gauge. I know, I'm sorry. 12 gauge shotgun, I know, it upset me too. Juvenile sentences to life would spend more years behind bars than adults, and of course that's disproportionately harsh. Evan Miller was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole at 14, but it was later overturned, and now he's in for 25 years, I believe. He's not out of prison yet. That was the state of Alabama. So some states have harsher laws than others. So you need to be careful as to where you are when you murder somebody, because you need to be sure the place. You don't want to ever kill anybody in Texas, because the Texans, they execute people more than any other state. As a matter of fact, if we look at all the executions around the United States, the Texans execute more people than all the other states combined. So Texas is the last place you want to kill someone. I'm sorry?
Florida.
Florida's another one, yeah. So if you've got somebody that you want to kill, Sharon, this is just a thought. If you're going to kill somebody, take them across the state line in Oklahoma and then kill them. That's just a thought.
Yeah.
Write that down. Anyway, I'd have killed him too. He's an ugly, ugly guy, isn't he? Oh, ugly guy. Troy Davis was sentenced to death for the shooting death of a police officer, something that you really don't want to do. If you're going to kill somebody, don't make sure they're not a cop, okay? Because the cops get really pissed off, prosecuting attorneys, you're real upset. And judges will support all of this. So if you kill a police officer's not the guy you want to shoot at. Over 20 years, the evidence supporting someone else as the murderer became overwhelming. So they knew that Troy Davis was probably not the killer. They knew it was probably somebody else, because they had all this new evidence. Support to stop the execution came from Pope Benedict XVI, former President Jimmy Carter, Desmond Tutu of South Africa, the Indigo Girls. These are the Indigo Girls right here. Amnesty International, they were trying to get Troy Davis acquitted. The FBI director, William Sessions, and of course, lots and lots and lots and lots of people. And they were all trying to stop the execution of Troy Davis. The Board of Paroles and Pardons met and rejected the plea. And he was executed in 2011. Despite the fact they had all these people, they were trying to get him not acquitted, but just to hear the trial again. And they wouldn't do it. They refused to do it. And he was executed in 2011. Despite all the overwhelming evidence to the contrary, that he was the murderer. He was executed.
Where was this at?
I'm sorry?
Where was this at?
Alabama. Or was it? It was one of the Carolinas, I'm sorry. I think it was North Carolina. Troy Davis, black in the South. They just picked somebody up who's black. Do they care who the murderer is? They all look alike anyway. That's what they say in the South anyway. I can't tell one from the other, as stupid as that sounds. I know. Many within the justice system use discretion. For example, police officers, prosecutors, and juries. When judges use discretion, it can lead to sentencing disparity. In other words, if you are an informant, of course, they're not going to arrest you. If you're a female that has just beaten the tar out of their husband, potentially they're not going to arrest you. They'll just let you go. They'll write it up differently so that it doesn't look like they should have arrested you. They'll use discretion. This is very common. You've never committed a crime before. You've always been a good kid. So they will use discretion. They just won't charge you with something. They won't arrest you this time. This is the first time they've ever caught you speeding, so they won't give you a ticket. They'll use discretion. And that's okay. When judges use discretion, it can lead to sentencing disparity. If you're white, you get off. If you're black, you're arrested and they throw the book at you. Different judges administering a variety of penalties for the same crime, of course, and that is what sentencing disparity is. When you go to trial, if you go to trial and you get a certain judge, they'll say, oh, you got a good judge. Oh, you got a bad judge. This is the hanging judge. This one always throws the book at people. My brother got a divorce from his wife, of course, and she kept taking him to court, back to court, to get more and more child support. And she was looking for more and more child support. And my brother, of course, there's something wrong with my brother anyway. So my brother was paying more and more money in child support. And finally, the judge that saw the case was our neighbor. It was we grew up with this guy. And so when he went to court to get the child support raised, because it was our old neighbor, he said, well, I know the Bradways. You guys are really nice people. No, you can't have more money. You're trying to take all the money this guy has. So he saw the right judge. He saw the right family judge, and he didn't have to pay more money in child support, my lucky brother, as far as that goes. And anyway, maybe he should have paid more child support. Was that fair? Well, probably not. He probably should have recused himself because he knew my brother, but he didn't recuse himself. And then my brother didn't have to pay more money. And then she got remarried, and my brother got remarried. Everything changed. Sentencing disparity, and all the kids grew up, so they're all in their 30s now. Sentencing disparity is apparent in the penalties given to African Americans and other minorities. What's the problem with committing crime on the reservation? Is there a problem with committing crime? Why do you guys go to jail longer than anybody else? What's wrong with committing a crime? Robbing the Wells Fargo down in Chin Lee. Real big problem with that. If you're going to rob the bank, go to Gallup and rob the bank in Gallup. Not in Chin Lee.
Federal
Or-
and state.
I'm sorry?
Federal and state.
Yeah, if you rob the bank in Gallup, you have to go to
Yeah.
state court. I know. But if you rob the bank on the reservation, you have to go to federal court. Federal court doesn't parole. I know, they don't, yeah, when they throw the book at you. Almost everything, there is no sentencing disparity. If you're a bank robber, you go to jail for 20 to 35 years or something like that. And that's it. And there is no chance of parole because the feds do not parole. So if you're going to commit a crime, go off the reservation. I mean, otherwise you're going to be spending an inordinate amount of time in jail. African Americans were more likely than people of other races to receive the death penalty, even when controlling for the severity of the crime. What is wrong with this guy? Does he look like a murderer to you? Why are people so afraid of black people? Why do they seem so dangerous? Where did all this come from? Is there something in our DNA that tells us, ooh, he's got darker skin, therefore I must be afraid of him? Is that what's going on? Are black people really more dangerous than anybody else? If we have a white guy, a Hispanic guy, a native guy, an Asian guy, did I say a white guy? We have two white guys. Who's the most dangerous person in that group? Who's the most likely to commit a crime? Who's the most likely guy to shoot somebody and kill him? Like all those people in that group. Like the white guy. The serial killers, they're almost all white. The shooters are almost all white. I don't know who the shooter was down in Jacksonville, but I'll bet you he's a white guy. The guy down in Parkland, white guy. The guy in Las Vegas, white guy. The most dangerous people are white idiots with guns. So why are we afraid of black people so much? Why are they the ones that are sentenced to death so much? Why are white people afraid of black males? I mean, it's always a white cop and a black male. And the black guy's not even armed, and they shoot him in the back. Why do they do that? What's wrong with black people? What makes them so frightening?
Can't see them.
In the daytime you can see them. Most of these things happen during the day. Why are we going to condemn them to death? Texas is terrible. They never execute white people. Sometimes they do, but not very often. It's usually a black guy. What did he do? Why was he convicted, and why does he have to be executed? Let's think about that. Why are white people so afraid of black people? Are they afraid of natives? Are you guys dangerous? If we look at the history of the United States, who killed more people than anybody else? Well, white people did, obviously. But who's number two? Do African Americans, do they rise up and try to kill everybody? Is that what has happened? That's only happened a couple times. My goodness gracious, you guys were fighting a war. I mean, they're war after war after war. We're not afraid of you guys. Why are we killing black people? They never fought a war against the United States government. Did they? Did they? Think about it. Let's figure it out. We'll figure it out. Well, next time we'll talk about this again. And you need to tell me why black people are so dangerous. Look it up. Maybe there's a reason why black people are so dangerous. I'm just curious. The hanging judge, this is my favorite picture. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time.